Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's Torah Talk. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. I am traveling this week on a quick trip to the Holy Land, to Israel. So I'll be back soon, and next week, God willing, we'll be back together again. I do feel like I am representing the Jacksonville community on this trip a little bit to Israel because there was a Yom HaAtzmaut event on Sunday, and Eitz Chaim Synagogue, their featured event, had a kotel, and you could put a note into the crack in the kotel. And I am going to be the one to be bringing all of those notes with me on my trip to put them into the cracks in the wall and the Western Wall. And I'm very happy to have the merit to be doing that on behalf of the community. So I guess I'm representing the Jewish community here in Jacksonville a little bit. So let's jump into this week's Torah portion, which is Behar. Behar has one primary theme that much of the beginning portion, for sure, of the Parsha is talking about, and that is the idea of Shemitah, that we farm and we produce produce from our farms for 6 years, but in the land of Israel, in the 7th year, it is the Shabbat for the land, and the land needs to rest, and we are not to plant or take care of any produce during that year. Everything should just be let to grow in the wild. Anybody can come and take it. Anybody who's interested can come into any farm and eat any produce, and that is the idea of Shemitah. So reading from the Parsha here, so Hashem says, tell the Jewish people, Daber b'nei Yisrael, and tell them that for 6 years, Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, for 6 years you will work the land, v'sheish shanim tizmar karmecha, and then uvashana hashaviyas Shabbos Shabboson, on the 7th year, it is a Shabbos, a year of rest for the land, and you should not work the land. And the Torah says, what happens if somebody will say, well, if that's the case, what in the world am I going to eat in the 7th year? If you will say, what will we eat in the 7th year? We're not working the land. How are we going to have a livelihood? How are we going to be able to eat? So the Torah says, I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. Interestingly, the Or HaChaim says that this question of what will I eat in the 7th year is something that the Torah is suggesting we might ask, but not out of a perspective that maybe I shouldn't keep Shemitah. Oh, well, I'm not going to have anything to eat, so forget it, I'm out of here. The Torah is kind of assuming that the Jewish people will say, as we always say, Nasa v'nishma, we're going to follow the words of the Torah, and we're not going to work the land in the 7th year. But Hashem, I got a problem. I just shut down my business for a year. I'm going to need a livelihood. So it's kind of like the question is coming from a very innocent place. Of course, I want to listen to you, Hashem. Of course, I'm going to leave the land to rest. But what am I going to eat? As opposed to coming with like a more hostile question and saying, I'm not interested in this whole thing. There's going to be no livelihood, so I'm going to have nothing to eat. So the Or HaChaim is saying that Hashem is saying, I will give my bracha, that is to someone who is ready to do it. And of course, a person needs to have food to eat, and Hashem will take care of them. Hashem will give blessing to the crops and make sure that people will indeed have enough to eat during that year. So Rav Hirsch asks a question that I think is really a great question. The Rashi really is the first one to ask in the beginning of the Parsha. We start talking about Shemitah. So Rashi says, Ma inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai v'halo kol ha-mitzvahs nemru mi-Sinai. Why is the name of this week's Torah portion Behar, at the mountain, Behar Sinai, at Mount Sinai? Don't we know that the entire Torah was given at Sinai with all of its details? So what's the big deal that Shemitah was given at Har Sinai? Of course it was, along with everyone else. So Rav Hirsch says that in the previous Parsha, we had a very difficult story at the end of the Parsha. It involved someone who cursed the name of God. And when that happened, the Jewish people kind of didn't know what to do. And like, oh, what do we do with this person? They put him aside. They like locked him up, and they had to consult with Hashem to say, okay, what is the punishment for such a person? And Hashem said, and etc. That was last week's Parsha. But Rav Hirsch says, so you might come and say, oh, wait a second. So not all the details were said at Sinai? Because I thought all details of the Torah was said at Sinai. But apparently the punishment for that sin in the previous Parsha was not said. So maybe other things were not said either. So Rav Hirsch says that's why the Torah starts off by saying Shemitah. The Torah teaches us the mitzvah of Shemitah with all its details and says this was at Har Sinai to let us know that every mitzvah, such as Shemitah, was given in all its details at Har Sinai. So of course, the question is, so why wasn't the punishment for the sin in last week's Parsha, why wasn't that given at Sinai? Apparently it wasn't. Otherwise, they would not have had to consult to figure out what to do with him. So Rav Hirsch explains that cursing the name of God was such a horrific sin that the Torah didn't even want to suggest the possibility that would actually happen. The Torah did not want to even discuss that a Jew would come to do something so horrific. And that's why, of course, Hashem said not to do these things, but to get into the details of the punishment, maybe it's best left unsaid and not to bring into the realm of reality the possibility that anyone do that. And the commentators also say that it wasn't a full-blooded Jew who did such a sin. A real full-blooded Jew would not have the ability to do such a horrific thing. It took someone whose father was Egyptian, who was a non-Jewish Egyptian, and he had a little bit of those genetics in there, and that was what led him to be able to do such a sin. But that's a little bit of that about the idea of why Shemitah is specifically, we're being told that it happened at Har Sinai, but of course, all of the mitzvahs in the entire Torah were in fact taught at Har Sinai. This one and every other one as well. So another idea that I've seen regarding the idea of Shemitah is how incredible it is that the Torah would write this mitzvah in such a public sense. So the Torah says, leave your fields on the seventh year. Do not work your fields. The problem is nobody's going to have anything to eat. So the Torah gives this mind-boggling guarantee that people will have what to eat if they observe this mitzvah. Hashem will bring forth his blessing in the sixth year, and everybody will be able to maintain their financial stability. So some commentators say that we see from here a clear proof that the Torah could not have been written by man, because a man would have to be insane to make this up and write it in a Torah. Because essentially what he's saying is leave your fields to go to waste, lose your livelihood for the seventh year, and don't worry, you'll be fine. On the sixth year, you're going to have a triple crop. So what happens the first time that doesn't happen? What happens when that's not fulfilled? So obviously, everybody will say, well, this is a scam. This is a fake. So any intelligent human being would not write such a confident guarantee in the Torah. And that's a proof that the Torah was written by someone who is above man, by Hashem, the creator of the world. He gives, the commentators say, another proof of that is the idea that the Torah tells the Jewish people to be Ola Regel 3 times a year, to make the trip to Jerusalem on the holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And what does that mean? That means they're leaving their homes. That means they're leaving their livelihood and their houses, everything, unguarded, while they take on this pilgrimage every year. I'm sure their neighbors knew that, oh, all right, it's April. The Goldsteins are going to be leaving their house and going off to Jerusalem for a month, right? Or a week or whatever it is. So that meant that everything that they left behind was very vulnerable to thieves or robbers or vandalism or whatever. And the Torah gives a guarantee that people will not be damaged financially. Their house that they leave behind will not be ruined because they went to be Ola Regel. That's also something that a human being would have to be crazy to guarantee in a Torah that he would be making up. You can't guarantee such a thing. The first time that happens, that's done. So that's why some see this as a proof that the Torah could not have been written by man, because you got to be crazy to write such a thing in a religion that you're trying to create. So that's all nice and dandy, but that only helps us if we understand why this bracha does not seem to apply nowadays in a literal sense. So what does the Torah say? The Torah says, "V'tzivisi brachasi b'shnasa hashishas." The Torah says, "I will bring forth my blessing, the asa esatvu l'shalosh shanim, and it will yield a crop sufficient for 3 years." Well, does that happen? If we would look at the state of Israel today, we'd look at Eretz Yisrael, and we see farms. Do we see that the land is exploding every 6th year? The year before Shemitah, all of a sudden, all farms that have people who are being Shomer Shemitah, who are going to keep the Shemitah, are just going to explode and have a triple crop. So this may happen on a small scale in various ways, but this certainly is not the common occurrence every 7 years in the land of Israel. It would make international headlines that, once again, in the land of Israel, there's this insane phenomena that the ground is producing 3 times the amount of crop. So why is it that this is not being fulfilled in its literal sense, even for people who are keeping Shemitah in this day and age? So I want to read for you a few words from the Sefer HaChinuch, and he talks about the parameters of when this mitzvah is applicable. He says, "Ve'over al zeh," anyone who transgresses this mitzvah, the avid admasai bizman habayis, and works his land during Shemitah in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, be'achas over al zeh be'achas min avodas asiris midaraisa, he is transgressing a biblical mitzvah. So you see there that he threw in that clause that the mitzvah of Shemitah is only applicable on a biblical level when it is done in the times that we have a Beis Hamikdash. So we know, of course, that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and therefore keeping Shemitah is not a mitzvah d'oraisa, not a biblical mitzvah. They explain that the mitzvah is not only dependent on the Beis Hamikdash, really it's tied to the mitzvah of Yovel, the Jubilee year. So after the 7-year cycle, that happens 7 times. And then this week's Parsha also talks about Yovel. After 7 such cycles, 49 years, the following year is another year where we let the ground rest, and that is called Yovel. So Shemitah is only practical if Yovel is happening. If Yovel is not happening, then Shemitah is not relevant. So Yovel requires the land of Israel to be split up based on the Jewish tribes. So in ancient days, when we controlled the land, when the Jewish people initially went in, then they conquered the land of Israel. So the land was split into the sections for each tribe. Every tribe had an inheritance. So one tribe was the north, and one was the south, and one was the central, and everybody had their own section. The laws of Yovel, I'm not going to get into in too many detail, but one of the primary focuses of the laws of Yovel is that ownership of land must always remain within the tribe to whom it was designated. And if somebody chooses to sell his land, it is only valid for 49 years or up to 49 years. As soon as the next Yovel comes, the property gets returned back to the original owner so that it will remain as the inheritance of the tribe to whom it was assigned. Essentially, that means that you can't buy anything permanently in Eretz Yisrael. You can only, essentially lease something for up to 49 years. So I'm sure that was taken into account in the real estate market in that day, that a real estate purchase was not something that was permanent, but rather something that was temporary. It could be as temporary as 2 years or 3 years if there was a Yovel coming up, in which case perhaps there were less transactions, but definitely it was not able to be more than 49 years. So Shemitah is dependent on Yovel. Yovel is dependent on when the Jewish people have their proper inheritance in Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we don't even know what tribe we're from. We don't even know what Shevet we're from. So certainly we are not living in the status that we were, and therefore Shemitah is not a mitzvah d'oraisa, which can explain why the fulfillment of the bracha, the mitzvah of Shemitah, is not quite as relevant as we thought it might have been. So if there isn't a biblical mitzvah, perhaps the blessing that comes with somebody who fulfills this mitzvah is not being given on the same level. But of course, we know that a God-fearing Jew does not differentiate between biblical and rabbinic mitzvahs. We are compelled to fulfill all of them equally. We don't differentiate between the two. And therefore, Shemitah in this day and age is still a very, very important mitzvah. And certainly one who follows it will see Hashem's blessing, will definitely see Hashem helping him to be able to earn his livelihood, even though he's giving up so much, for the sake of the mitzvah, and he's not able to have his normal income from his farm. But that's just the basic idea of the status of Shemitah in this day and age. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that this idea of Vitzivisias Berchasi, that on the 6th year there's going to be a triple crop, does not necessarily mean, as I understood it to mean the first time I read it, doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a triple crop, that you're going to go to that field and there's literally going to be 3 times as many, apples, oranges, and whatever that there was in a normal year. The Ar Chaim says that that's not how it works. The Ar Chaim says that you will be able to survive off your normal crop for 3 years. Okay, what are those 3 years, by the way, is a dispute among the commentaries as well, because the Torah makes it sound like it's going to be abundance for 3 full years, the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. But some of the commentaries say, no, it doesn't mean 3 full years. It just means the end of the year before Shemitah, the entire year of Shemitah, and the beginning of the year after Shemitah until the normal season when farmers go and cut their crops. So, we just need to be able to get them until they're be able to, reap their harvests in the 3rd year. So essentially it's, a little more than a year and a half or so. But regardless, the Ar Chaim says the point is that this amount of crop from a regular year will last you until Shemitah is over. So a person will eat less and will be more satisfied. People will miraculously be able to use a year's worth of supply for, almost 2 years, or according to some, it would be 3 years. And that was the miracle of Shemitah. Certainly in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, as incredible as it is to talk about an open miracle, that's not the only open miracle that happened. There were multiple open miracles that happened in ancient times, in times of Beis HaMikdash, that were absolutely incredible. And this goes along as being one of those as well. So I was wondering about this a lot. This was really bothering me over the last couple of days as I was looking through the Parsha, trying to understand. I don't get it. The Torah says, Vitzivisias Berchasi. The Torah says that there's going to be a triple crop. Why isn't it international news that every single farm in Israel whose farmer is fulfilling the mitzvah of Shemitah is having this incredible, So once I looked through these commentators and I shared what I've just shared with you now, I see a lot of amazing answers, and this brings a lot of clarity to me. And, on a side note, the takeaway lesson here for me is that the rabbis ask all our questions. Any question you can think of on the Torah, chances are you're not the only ones with those questions. No matter how small or how big or how fundamental that question is, an integral part of the way we practice our Judaism throughout all the centuries is we love asking questions. We absolutely love asking questions, and we debate and we answer. So, the takeaway here for me is if we're bothered by something, we can have faith in the rabbis that if we do a little research in it, we'll find, usually very amazing and compelling answers. Now, in this day and age, there definitely is some incredible stories of bracha, of blessing that Hashem brings to farmers who are giving up so much to properly fulfill the mitzvah of Shemitah. And it's incredible to see how the Jewish world unites to help support such farmers. The most famous organization that I know of that helps with this is called Keren HaShvius, and they help farmers who want to keep Shemitah, and people all over the world will contribute to them and say, I want some of the merit, I want some of the schus to help a farmer fulfill this mitzvah of Shemitah, and they collect money and they give money to farmers to be able to sustain themselves. So, the farmers themselves, they've seen a lot of bracha. There's a lot of stories, incredible stories of how farmers got by financially, even though they took such a big hit. And sometimes it was as simple as, the Keren HaShvius, the generous and wealthy donors, people, anybody who donated any amount of money to help support this, they were helping support the farmer. But sometimes there's really been incredible stories about farms that were damaged by storms or other kinds of incidents, and the farm right next to the damaged one, which was keeping Shemitah, managed to stay unharmed, managed to have more produce, and there is no shortage of these kinds of stories. And I think the message here is that even for sure it's a rabbinic mitzvah, but Hashem takes care of those who are moser nefesh, those who go through so much self-sacrifice to do a mitzvah. Hashem is definitely going to be there, and sometimes Hashem might make something that seems miraculous, and sometimes it might seem not so miraculous. A fundraising campaign that helps support the farmers doesn't seem like, necessarily an open divine hand of God, but certainly it shows the farmers that were there for them, and that ultimately, in whatever way Hashem wants to, Hashem will take care of people who are doing such mitzvahs. Now, one of the most famous stories, I don't know if you've heard this story, but I can't resist sharing it. It involves an incredible miracle that took place because of a farmer that was keeping Shemitah. And I'm going to play it for you now, and then we'll get back right back into it.
If there was ever a picture in the dictionary of a Jewish farmer, it would be Ira Zimmerman.
From very, very young age, I was going to work with my father in the fields. I was driving the tractor, and this is the way of living.
Because he grew up without a Torah education, without mitzvahs, without Shabbos, he has a passion for using his farming skills to promote Torah and mitzvahs, which is why he volunteers to harvest the wheat for Matzah Shmura every year. And he also volunteers a ton of his time and efforts for Keren HaShvius, an organization that helps farmers keep the laws of Shemitah.
I feel it's like Baal Tshuva is making a tshuva on the thing he did before.
7 years ago was the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. It turns out that year it rained in Israel very late in the harvesting season.
All the center of Israel was not good for the Matzah Shmura. And also the north was raining this year. So only what we have to do is to go to the south of Israel.
Fortunately, Ira and his friends found a field in the south of Israel, next to the Gaza border. Only problem was, no farmer wants to work in a field next to the Gaza border. The tension between Israel and Gaza was palpable. They were at the brink of war.
But then, because I grew up this region, so I know the region. I know it's a little bit hard, a little bit risky. Sometimes they shoot, sometimes they throw stones. So okay, let's do it and keep going. The problem is that the kibbutznik, the farmer, says you can't take it now, it's not ready yet, it's still a little bit green. You need to wait another 1.5, 2 weeks. And we tell them, look, we don't wait. This next year is Shemitah. We need to have double of the amounts. We can't take the risk another rain will come. We need to take it now.
They worked overtime from dawn till dusk, from sunrise till sunset. They tried their best to do it as fast as possible because they didn't want rain to ruin any of their chances to take the wheat to be used for Matzah Shmura. In addition, they needed double the amount of wheat they would usually harvest because the next year was Shemitah.
We need to take double, so it's 3,000 tons.
While they were on the field on the tractor, Ira remembers his partner saying to him, Ira, I can feel that the ground beneath us is shaking. It feels kind of unstable.
But it wasn't like something which is not usual because it's a field, it's a big tractor. You have rocks, you have holes.
And within 2 to 3 days, they managed to harvest the entire field. They sent shiploads of the wheat to all the major cities in Israel for those bakeries to have for Matzah Shmura and also to store for the next Pesach for Shemitah. 2 days later, it was all over the news.
חדשות הערב, מאולפני כאן בירושלים.
כך זה נראה לפני זמן קצר, בשטח המנהרה בה נתפסו 13 המחבלים שניסו להיכנס לקיבוץ סופה.
The terrorists from the Hamas, they were digging a tunnel in the ground and they come up exactly where we are working with the combine for the Matzah Shmura.
They were hoping that the wheat that had ripened and grew in that field would cover them. But because Ira and his partner risked their lives, they worked overtime to harvest every strand of wheat for Matzah Shmura and to store for the next year Shemitah. The terrorists were exposed right away.
The Israeli IDF was able to see them in the camera and straight away they were able to kill them.
There's only one mitzvah in the Torah where Hashem gives an explicit promise of Etzivisi as Berchasi, that he will enforce his blessing unto those who keep the mitzvah of Shemitah.
This is the Hashgacha of the Shem Yitbarach. Have the possibility to keep Shemitah, which made this miracle to happen.
So that's just a little story, one of the more famous ones, but there's other ones as well that talk about the incredible bracha that Hashem brings to people who keep Shemitah. I wanted to mention one more idea that I heard from Rav Usher Weiss. So Rav Usher Weiss was talking about how in the context of Shemitah, the people, farmers who keep Shemitah are referred to as Giborei Koach. Giborei Koach, powerful warriors. There's only one other time that a Jew or the Jewish people were referred to as Giborei Koach. And what is that? Chazal say that the Jews were referred to in this terminology when they said Na'aseh v'nishma. When they said at Mount Sinai, they will do and they will listen. Basically committing that they will do whatever it is that Hashem says. They have such a trust and a love for Hashem. They want to follow the word of Hashem. They're in, and then they'll listen to what it is going to be. And he says the reason, the common denominator between these two people, the people who keep Shemitah and the Jews who say Na'aseh v'nishma, is because they both very much were going against human nature. Human nature, when it comes to farming, would be, of course, you're going to take care of your field. You're not going to let it grow to waste and not maintain it. And for somebody to go beyond that is a gibor. That is somebody who is truly powerful. And that's in the realm of something physical, a material part of our world, our livelihood. But the same thing happens when it comes to our spirituality. There, the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. They will do even before they hear. And that was referring to committing to accepting and fulfilling the Torah. So there also they were referred to as Giborei Koach, as the Mishnah says, Ezahu Gibor HaKovesh Etz Yitzro in Pirkei Avos, who is a true warrior, somebody who can subdue his evil inclination, his Yetzer Hara. So I think the message from this is that it is very difficult for us to really subdue our Yetzer Hara, to be so mighty, to be able to push down our own will and listen to the word of Hashem, to listen to the will of Hashem. But if we could pull that off, if we could be that kind of gibor, then we will receive incredible blessing from Hashem, v'tzivisi as berchasi. If we're willing to do that to ourselves, then Hashem will certainly repay us and bring us a lot of bracha in our lives as well. Thank you so much for listening.